Welcome. I am Dr. Patrice Berry, licensed psychologist, and here I share legal and entertainment news from a psychological perspective. This is going to be a difficult one, and I want us to just try to keep an open mind, breathe. I definitely have some thoughts, especially with Kevin Franke being one of the ones that's championing like changes to child welfare laws. I definitely have some thoughts about this because for me, I don't know that he does enough to admit how he benefited from some of the current laws. He is going to blame Jody Hildebrandt. And I do think that the things that he's calling for, some of them, I feel like he says some good words, but I also feel a lot of mixed emotions, some of this coming from him. Okay. And so we're all going to breathe. We're all going to get through it. A lot of things. Cause once again, it's like, I don't know that he fully acknowledged the type of parenting, the type of things he was doing before Jody Hildebrandt even got involved. It does sound like things became clearly neglectful and harmful and unsafe for the children once she was there because of her view of like children needing this strict, like you have to get the secular out of them. I don't know, like she had some very strict beliefs, but still, I wanted us to talk about it. And so let's dive right into his statement. I'm going to make myself smaller. All right, let's go. I am going to interrupt. So, for anyone watching on replay, anybody that is here, please know that if you want to watch the full link without my interruptions, that's available down in the description.
I prepared some remarks and I have shared those with Representative Watkins. And so I believe if she has not done so already, those remarks can be made available to you upon your request.
Would you make sure you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Good morning, representatives. My name is Kevin Franke, and I am the former husband of convicted child abuser Ruby Franke and a former client of convicted child abuser Jody Hildebrandt. In July 2022, I was led to believe by Ruby and Jody that I was selfish, narcissistic, enabling to my children, lustful, and a significant danger to my family. I was convinced by those women and others from Jody's organization named Connections with an X that to save my family, I needed to immediately leave my home and family and live in a no contact separation for an unspecified amount of time.
I wish that he had brought on some other people like Adam or Earth. There are other people that have been in his exact circumstance that Jody did this to as well. And I do definitely think the fact that she was still a licensed therapist does add additional harm to this. People go to therapy, they go to counseling because they're looking for help. They're looking for support. And if I were to tell a client, "Hey, this is what you're doing." And that's why a good therapist never says you need to do exactly this. So I don't try to control my clients. Now, I will sometimes give, especially clients that I've been working with for a while. And if they're in a pattern where it's like, okay, this decision you're currently making, this seems to be coming from a place of pain. We need to take a step back. Like, have you considered these other options? But I would never tell a client, you need to do exactly this. If I felt children were at risk or anything like that, that's where often social services or somebody else is getting involved. And Kelly Alexander. So Ruby Franke, Jody Hildebrandt, real quick refresher. So Ruby Franke and Kevin Franke had a YouTube channel called 8 Passengers with over 1 million subs. And on that channel, they documented their lives. And even before Jody was involved, there seemed to be some interesting parenting dynamics, and there had been multiple calls to Child Protective Services, and they ended up shutting down the channel. I wanna say in maybe they ended up shutting down the channel at some point. In 2022, according to his statement, he leaves the home and he's pretty much estranged from the children. He does not talk to them, he does not see them. He only communicates with Jody Hildebrandt, who was a coach, and she had a program called Connections, but she was also a licensed counselor. And there have been multiple complaints. I have a whole playlist on this case if you want to take a look at it. There is a lot to this case. His children ended up experiencing, all of them, I think, ended up experiencing quite a bit, but the ones that, ended up in social services care are the minor children. He's gonna mention that his daughter, Sherry, it was also involved in this statement and in this call for change. I thought it was interesting that Sherry wasn't there, and I don't know why. I think Sherry's in school, and so there could be a lot of reasons why. I didn't go into Sherry's social media to see, like, if she has made any comments after this. Y'all can feel free to comment in the chat if y'all have seen anything like that. But that's just a brief overview of this case. There's a lot more details and it gets a lot more horrific, but
For over 1 year, I remained in complete isolation from all but Jody and some other of the men who participated in Connections, who were in similar situations, I'll add. Since Jody's and Ruby's arrest on August 30th, my children and I have been in the process of reunification. It's been difficult and painful, this process of healing from this trauma and this tragedy. I'm speaking today to you, representatives, on behalf of myself and also my adult daughter, Miss Sherry Franke, who could not be here with us this morning, to share our joint thoughts regarding child welfare laws and the standards for professional licensing in this state. Ms. Jody Hildebrandt, a professionally licensed mental health counselor in the state of Utah, knew the Utah child welfare system like the back of her hand, including its rules, its limitations, and its loopholes. Jody convinced my wife that the government wanted to rip religious families like ours apart and indoctrinate our children with secular teachings.
and so I do think this is where some of the religious stuff comes in because a lot of people have brought in. Okay, and so I want to clarify, he is speaking to lawmakers to ask for changes to Utah's laws regarding child welfare. I don't think he's blaming Child Protective Services, because he once again benefited from the fact that I guess in Utah, if a complaint is filed, they have 30 days to investigate it, and if they don't open that case within 30 days, the case is just closed or dropped. It's based on what he's saying, it sounds like Jody Hildebrandt was aware of this, and what he and Ruby, his wife, ex-wife now, what they would do is they would ignore the calls and the message. So social services would be knocking, police officers would be knocking at their door. They would be home and they would simply not answer the door. And he's also calling for this religious exemption, for there to not be these religious exemptions. So he is calling for some of this. I do have mixed feelings about this message coming from him. I do feel like he does have some decent points, and so that's where it can be. That's why I see us, all of us, to take a breath and to just try to get to the meat of how could what he's saying potentially benefit children in the future. He's going to take it further than I would recommend potentially if I were making a statement to my lawmakers about child protective services, but that's where we are.
In the aftermath of my wife's and Jody's arrests, I've come to learn that Jody masterfully coached Ruby in navigating the child welfare loopholes in this state. In a nutshell, all they had to do were three things. One, keep the children isolated from the world. Two, ignore all the phone calls from DCFS caseworkers. And three, not answer the door when DCFS and/or police officers knocked. That's it. Those three things were all that were required for all of the train wreck that you've seen play out in the media over the past year.
I wanted to validate this because Mama Bear, that's some of my feelings too. And so we're also going to listen to his interview with reporters after. I feel like they pushed him a little, and because I think they're going to ask him because he did benefit from this as well. He he ignored calls from Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services was trying to get in touch with him when they were getting all of these calls, and he ignored those calls as well. And so that's going to come up in the interview with the news, and we are going to watch that as well. Would I consider doing a video for dealing with emotions when celebrities seem legally able to do anything? Aw, and, the thing with Baldwin is the prosecutor made, a huge mistake, made a huge thing. And so I do have a video. If you go back to my live list or to my therapeutic resources playlist, I have a video on the power of not reacting, but what it is it's I have to accept what I do and don't have control over, and then it can still be unfair, like, it can still be incredibly unfair, a situation can be, and, I get frustrated when I hear of someone only getting sentenced with 5 years. This came up a lot with the Tracy Ferreter case, and I shared her plea deal on my community tab as well. If you don't know about the case, but justice doesn't always look the way that we might want it to, and I think in this case, in the rust, because I think you said Baldwin, right? Me and names. Yes, yes, with Alec Baldwin, that prosecutor messed up big time, and that's what allowed what happened to happen. It just did. And so, all right, let's keep going.
Because of the complete isolation of my children, there was not sufficient evidence based on our current laws for government to intervene despite the clear red flags recognized and reported by our close friends and neighbors and family as well. This allowed Jody and Ruby to emotionally and physically terrorize my children behind closed doors, even while those who were the closest to the situation were screaming repeatedly to authorities for help.
And he wasn't one of those people. He was one of those people that was caught up in what Jody was saying, and somebody asked if this was signs of a cult, and I have covered that related to this case on Jody Hildebrandt ran connections, in my opinion, similar to a cult. Her idea, what her beliefs, she was the end all be all. She would tell people who they could be with, what marriages could be together, what marriages needed to separate. She was the one that had she had like visions. There's some very odd stuff with Jody, and in my personal opinion, her own traumas and her own personality issues and all of that got in the way of her providing ethical, safe care. Uh, there's this case goes really deep, and if you want to do a deep dive, I have a playlist going over all of this. All right, let's keep going.
And those authorities claim to be powerless in the situation to intervene. Representatives' laws need to change in this state. First, We are asking you legislators today to begin changing the laws in such a way that reported red flags from multiple individuals close to children, namely friends, neighbors, and family, be considered sufficient merit to take children into temporary protective custody without additional evidence of child abuse.
Now, I don't he's saying that just reports from friends and family should be enough for kids to go into foster care. For me, that takes it a step a little to me, that should be enough to be able to get a warrant for the police to be able or for DSS to have to be able to have access to the children. If children are homeschooled, that there can be a court order where they legally have to provide the children so that they can check on the well-being of children. I don't know if just the reports of friends and family should be enough for kids to end up in foster care. Like that's really far. But I do think that it should be at least be enough for them to have face-to-face contact outside of the presence of the parents of the caregivers that should be enough. And so I agree that our social service department is not well funded. Social workers typically make between sometimes 40,000 to sometimes supervisors might make 60 to 70,000 a year. A lot of times their caseloads are way too high, where one social worker might be managing like 50 or more children in care, and this is just my understanding as a psychologist. I do work with other people, with social workers that are a little bit more knowledgeable here, but yes, I definitely think social services is spread too thin. And Kevin is suing Jody for what he's saying, the ongoing care that his children will need. I personally do not think that he should benefit personally from any of the money. So if they do end up getting money from Jody, because his wife was involved, his wife was the other one right there. And Ruby Frankie's journal, where she's detailing what she is doing to her children, I think Jody was an influence, but I don't think it was 100% Jody. I don't at all think it was 100% Jody. I just don't. I think she might have resented having the youngest children. I think she felt obligated to have children. I don't think she like it's just and I've went into more detail on other videos about that, but all right, we'll leave it there.
Perpetrators of child abuse rarely commit such acts out in public, but behind closed doors. These individuals should no longer be able to hide child abuse by simply ignoring the phone calls and the door knocks from DCF caseworkers and waiting the obligatory 30 days before the case is closed.
And that's what he did as well, but we're just gonna press play.
Second, laws regarding emotional abuse need to be created and or improved in this state. DCFS caseworkers recently told my daughter Sherry that they have never once removed a child from an abusive home due to emotional abuse in this state.
And emotional harm is incredibly difficult to prove. In my state, they have what's called child in need of services or supervision. And sometimes the state can call for this, the school can call for this. And what it can do is it can court order families to get their child therapy or treatment, because I think they would have considered working with Jody as like their children being in therapy or receiving therapeutic services, but Jody was the like unethical one. So she has since lost her license. That's why I feel so comfortable saying all of these things. And I just really struggle with this case. And so, Sarah, if you want to just type your X handle, because if you have it on X, or if you have any of your resources on X, you can type your X handle so that people can check out your blogs and your resources there. But I just I don't think he's taking enough responsibility in this for some of his role. And that's not, so his goal is to change laws and all those things. But with emotional harm, it can be incredibly difficult to prove. And what they often require is a therapist to say, yes, this is emotional harm. And for me, there have been a few cases that rose to that level, and examples of that would be a parent telling a child to unalive themselves, a parent, telling, like, the child becoming, getting these certain thoughts after just shaming, demeaning, and I've worked with the parent. I've told them, I often write it down, so I often put it into a written treatment agreement where it's like, "These things are harmful to your child. If you do these things, this is emotional harm, and, like, I will call." The interesting thing about me doing that is when I do that, the parent can just fire me. So I can just get fired. And if it was a case like that, I might still just call social services just so they have the person on their radar. But he is correct that emotional harm is very rarely prosecuted. We know that screaming and yelling at children is does the same amount of harm as physical harm. So the whole sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt. That's the research does not show that. Words hurt, and if a parent is telling a child, if they're calling them names, if they're shaming and demeaning them, we know that has an impact on child development. The hard part is that sometimes it can just be difficult to prove. So it's just very, very, yes. And gaslighting can be incredibly difficult. And so, all right, all right. Ah, Kelly, I love that. You can stay in your head forever. Exactly. And often that critical parent that often becomes the voice that the child internalizes, especially if the child continues to struggle with anxiety or depression or different mental health conditions. The voice in their head is often that parent saying, "You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. You're not lovable. You're not worthy," if that's what the parent was kind of projecting on a child. Animal Cookie, welcome, welcome. I respect what he's saying, but if he's going to call out the state for ignoring it, he should have to answer for why he ignored it when the internet was saying the same to him. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, so let's continue to listen. This is, yeah.
Despite being much more rampant than physical abuse, emotional abuse is poorly defined by our current laws. Third, Utah laws need to become more clear, defined, and punitive regarding child abandonment.
And he abandoned his children. And so that's where the hard part is, like, and he willingly walked away. Because if he was attempting to see his children and Ruby was keeping them from him, he would have had a case for parental alienation. Parental alienation is where a parent tells a child, your other parent is the worst, and that the one parent restricts visitation with the other parent without there being like a court order or some legal cause. They just do it because they're maybe mad at the other person or for some other reason. It's just very interesting to me that he's calling for changes to child abandonment, and that is what happened, and that's why Jody and Ruby were able to take the situation as far as they did. So he is a lawyer by trade, I think. I think he, because he taught, and I feel like he was like a professor. I think he has a law degree, I could be wrong, but I get why he's calling for these changes, and I do have some issues because he was never charged with child abandonment. A lot of you all are lawyer chicks and you follow Natalie lawyer chick, and she was screaming from the rooftop, "Kevin, where were you?" Like that's me paraphrasing. Like she was very much like he should be charged with child abandonment. I think the state just chose who to charge, what to do. He does not have custody of his children yet, as far as I know. I believe they have a hearing. I want to say it's in October or November. I think there's a hearing coming up where they're gonna, determine those things. His children are likely receiving therapy services. He likely does have maybe supervised visitation. I don't know exactly what he has. I've been involved with cases like this, and that's typically what happens when the goal is reunification. Parents don't have to be perfect. But what the state has to do is if he has the capacity to be legally safe enough, and the fact that he knows these things are an issue, that has me a little bit more hopeful that maybe he's changed some, but we'll never know, and it'll be up to the state to determine if he's safe enough, if he's able to regain full custody of his children.
Utah parents should no longer be able to leave their minor children at home alone for days unattended without consequences.
Oh, so that's what you're talking about.
Finally, we can
Because, Ruby used to leave the kids, at home, like, overnight without, so he Ru Ru Ruby used to leave the kids, for days at a time sometimes. Okay. But to me, he also kind of, like, just left and wasn't there physically. He was there financially, so he did continue to, like, pay all the bills and all of that stuff. But wow. Wow.
cannot allow religious extremism to be an acceptable cover and shield for child abuse in this state.
That being said, in Utah, so that's why I'm covering this, and, with the religious aspect, because the way that Jody was able to kind of get these parents, because at one point he was believing what Jody was saying too, was that Jody was saying the state was out to indoctrinate the children. She probably threw out, like, LGBTQ stuff and, I don't know, like, immorality. She probably did the normal, just kinda cult-like stuff, and it made them more and more isolated, which was so just pathological that she called her program Connections, because the connection they were building was only with her, and she was isolating people more and more from their community, from everybody else. And I saw a good comment. And free range parenting. So I have neighbors that as when their kids were as young as like 4 and 5, their kids would play outside for like and the parents would sometimes be on the porch, the parents would sometimes be inside the house, but the kids would they're pretty free range. That's different than leaving a 16-year-old responsible for children ages like 11, I don't know, as young as maybe 8 or 9 or something, leaving children over days. So in Virginia, you can't leave minor children, I think, overnight. So minor children need to or under a certain age, like there are certain I'll have to pull that up because our county sent the laws home just so that families were aware how long each age, could be alone by themselves, home alone. Because, under a certain age, it was not at all. Under another age, it was like a few hours, and then it kind of worked its way up. But if you have children like under the age of 16 or something, they're not able to be home alone overnight. All right. Do, do, do. All right, let's keep going.
Lastly, we call on legislators to ask some very important questions regarding how Ms. Jody Hildebrandt continued to be licensed by this state as a professional mental health counselor, even after all that was apparently known about her by DOPL, the Department of Professional Licensing, since at least 2010. We call for a professional audit of DOPL regarding what it knew about Jody Hildebrandt, when it knew it, and how it acted based on that knowledge. And we call for that audit to be transparent and shared with the public. A licensed mental health professional should not be able to just turn off the ethics and standards associated with his or her professional licensure by acting under the nebulous guise of something called a life coach.
So this is true. So I personally, I know a therapist that so I don't think there's anything wrong with therapists being a coach, but there should still be ethics and there should still be boundaries. And as a psychologist, if I'm working with somebody as a parent coach, I still wouldn't have an intimate relationship with them. I still wouldn't have a dual relationship with. There are certain ethics that I would still hold as a coach. And there aren't any national coaching regulations for any state that I'm aware of, and there definitely aren't any, like, national ones. Now, some people can do certain certifications that have certain guidelines, and there are coach therapists that are also coaches that do adhere to, national, because there are national coaching organizations that have certain guidelines, but there are people that in order to do what they wanted to do, they just dropped their license so that they could practice across state lines. So when I see somebody as a coach, I don't call it therapy. And I very clearly I make sure that the person only needs coaching and that they don't need therapy. The difference between coaching and therapy is that coaching is more for maybe it's a time limited thing. It's for like a minor issue. So maybe I have a parent with ADHD who has a child with ADHD. They both have their own therapists, but they need some help with just some of the day to day. And the parent needed some resources, just needed help creating a schedule, needed help with managing their emotions when they get triggered. They just needed some just kind of not but like hands-on just support that's just different from clinical therapy. But like, let's say somebody was having has major depression and they don't have a therapist and they're looking for a coach, but it's to treat, their significant thoughts or psychosis or something like that. No, like that's coaching is not appropriate. That person needs a licensed therapist. Similar to religious counseling that isn't by like a licensed professional. So sometimes there are Christian counselors that aren't that do like spiritual guidance, do spiritual training, that do Christian counseling, but it's not a they can't do clinical counseling. They can't diagnose. They can't do those things. And people just have to be careful because I've had people have bad experiences with like a religious counselor. And when I looked it up, the person, they weren't, it was just a pastor that had taken some classes in like pastoral counseling and it wasn't an actual licensed therapist. And so um all right, let's keep it going.
We know of no other licensed profession that allows such reckless behavior. Mental health professionals hold a powerful and sacred trust with people, usually the most vulnerable among us. And they should be held to a higher standard than they currently are by the professional licensing standards in our state. These conclude the remarks that my daughter Sherry and I wanted to make. I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration, and also make myself available, as well as my daughter.
And I did just want to point out this comment. Jody did the same thing to her niece, and I did a video covering Jesse Hildebrandt and their experience with Jody. And um, Jesse has said that they're going to show up to Jody's parole hearings, like as Jody starts having those, to talk about their experience with Jody and just how just sadistic and pathological she really is. And then, but Lost Phoenix, I hope you've also read Ruby's journal, because in Ruby's journal, the things that she did to her own children. I know that people can have their minds changed by by a cult, but I don't think Ruby was that. And there was something in Ruby that enjoyed doing what she did, in my opinion. Sorry, yes, Ruby, good. Y'all know me in names because sometimes I accidentally say the wrong one. So I was making sure I said Ruby. Yes. I do think that Ruby had a significant part to play in what happened to the kids. And I do think if Kevin had known how bad things were, I do think he would have stepped in. But it sounds like he kind of let Ruby kind of run things, I think. I don't know. Cause who just if I told my husband, like, you gotta go, he would uh uh like, and you can't have any contact with your son. You have to keep paying the bills. And I but the fact that she also had this licensed therapist on her side, I think that made it a little bit more difficult as well. All right, so let's get to his press conference. Share this tab. Let's go big. All right, so this was a press conference with I think it's K2 News. I could be wrong, but it's 2 News out in Utah.
Why did you show up to the Capitol today to talk to lawmakers?
I showed up to the Capitol today to talk to lawmakers because my family has been devastated by what two women were very easily able to carry out in acts of horrific child abuse. And they were able to navigate our laws and take advantage of loopholes that exist, all from the coaching of Miss Jody Hildebrandt. And those laws need to change. All of the ways that they were able to navigate those loopholes need to be exposed. They need to be talked about, and we need to address these issues out in public.
Was it seriously just as easy as just not answering the phone? That's all it took for them to write this for them?
Yeah.
So the question was it simply as easy as just not answering the door?
Not answer the door, not speak with authorities, DCFS or police, just remain silent. And as long as everybody remains silent, then within a specified amount of days, typically 30, the case closes by itself.
I know as our team was working to cover this, and we learned of the many trips that had been made to the family home by police who were assisting DCFS, and we could just see how many times they had gone in the months leading up to this. We were surprised. I'd like to know how you felt when you learned about all of those trips by authorities to the home, yet nothing happened to help the children.
Yeah, it was frustrating for me. It was frustrating for me to hear the story of police officers. As they said, they were standing on the front porch and they could see the children and they could see my former wife through the window, ignoring them. And they said, even with all of the reports, all of the red flags that were given to them by our oldest daughter, Sherry, and by our neighbors, they still could not intervene. They were on the phone with a judge, waiting, and the judge finally said, nope, I'm not comfortable with this. You cannot intercede. And so
All right. So, in my personal opinion, I do think that money and privilege was a part of this as well, because I do know that some people that don't have as much money, they've had their children taken for way less. Judges give orders for way less. And in this situation, I think the judge, because they probably gave the address, I think they live in like probably at least $1 million home, probably multi. They live in this large home, large neighborhood. They probably knew the family was going to get, lawyers and all of that. And the judge could have just been trying, and those are just my thoughts, my opinion, okay? Because I do think if this had been a family that did not have money and there weren't gonna be any political ramifications. So this family had over 1 million subs on YouTube, okay? At this point, they had deactivated their YouTube channel, but still, everybody in the town probably knew of them. And I do think that could have played a part of it as well. Um, Let me see. Okay. What about his abandonment of the children? Exactly. Exactly. And I think when he was in the home, some things were definitely problematic. I think taking a child's bed for 9 to 12 months, like that is I think it was 9 months. I think the oldest son, I want to say he lost his bed for like 9 months for doing a prank. CPS would not have gotten involved for that. Like they might have just said, "Okay, like that's too much. You need to give your child a bed." The things they were doing were problematic, and people were making CPS calls. Ruby being mad about I think she was 6 years old or 5 years old, the very young child forgetting her lunch. Ruby was very, very upset about that, and, that wouldn't have been a reason to at that point, that I'm aware of. So our laws are very interesting. And sometimes what can happen is there can be a prevention case that's opened where there's a family that's maybe because they often want to avoid removal if they can because that's incredibly traumatic for the children. Now, for children that are not safe. And at that time, I think the family was toxic, and now I have not went back and watched every single YouTube video. I think it was very, very problematic, and this is what they recorded. So only who knows what was happening when the cameras were off. I do think Sherry has described some of how she felt during that time, and I haven't listened to everything she shared. I did see that the oldest son called out a YouTuber who like recorded her son at the doctor's office and was kind of using her child for social media and he was just trying to give the mom a heads up and he DM'd her and was just like, "Hey, I don't know, I don't like I forget his name, but, my family was involved in all of this. My mom used to do very similar things to me, and now I despise" no, those weren't his exact words, but he just tried to give her some feedback that she could be harming her child. And she got mad at him and told him that he needed therapy, her child was fine, and all these things. And no, like when you record the most intimate moments, like your child at a doctor and the child's upset, like, you don't put that stuff on social media, and in the picture, her child looks to be a teenager, and there are other videos covering that if you haven't heard of it. And so Crystal, he does not have custody of his children, they are still in DSS custody. That is gonna be a DSS case, and, that'll be determined by the courts in, um in I think November. And there's going to be a plan where he's likely had to do parenting classes. He might have had to do anger management. He probably had to have a psychological evaluation. They might have court ordered therapy. They probably court ordered some family therapy, some family reunification stuff. They likely have done a lot of things. And normally, as long as a parent goes through those things, normally the state's first goal is reunification even for kids that have been harmed, if that nuclear family can be restored, it's often better for kids to remain in a safe environment if it can be safe. Because if the state determined that he is unable to be a safe person, and that bar is very, very high. Okay. It's very, very high. If the state determined he didn't have the capacity to parent, that's when the state turns their goal to termination of parental rights. And normally that's when a person isn't complying with the foster care plan. That bar is often very, very high. Okay. And so it's a lot. The state is likely going to have an eye on him, and something that I've seen with some reunification plans is sometimes the children start spending more and more time in the home while the state still has custody, so that they can see how that transition goes. And then, but once the parent has full rights back, but they might still order that the kids remain in therapy, or they might still order certain things. And so Crystal, were these those first calls with his wife, or is he still having calls with her? Because I do believe his tone changed after he got some of the discovery and he realized all that had happened. I thought that it did. I don't know if it did. I could be wrong, but I really want to talk about this more from the perspective of the child welfare system and how certain changes. I feel like he's calling for some good things, but it's sometimes difficult just who it's coming from. If you want to see the rest of this one, I have the link down in the description. The very next video that you'll be redirected to, if you don't want to stay for that video, please just hop off. I'm going to be talking about the Netflix series, The Man with 1,000 Kids. I really want to talk about it more from the perspective of what can be done to support the kids now, and not really focusing as much on the guy that's allegedly a serial donor. I don't want to focus on him as much. I will talk about it in general just because like that's you kind of have to talk about it some, but I really want to talk about some resources for donor conceived people and families that are donor conceived. All right. I truly appreciate you all joining me. If you're not staying for the next video, no worries. I will see you all on Tuesday, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week.